Greetings and welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my Inside Track videos, I'm going to explore a very notable astrological event. This is the Cardinal Grand Cross, which occurs on the 22nd of July. It's very exciting. It does have some challenges. It is a little bit complex, but I'm going to try and break it down in a bit by bit way that I hope will be relatable. If you are new to my channel, it's lovely to have you with us. And if you have any comments, please share them. I do try to interact with each one. This is very much a community. If you're a returning visitor, thank you for joining me once more. Your subscriptions are really welcome. So what is a Grand Cardinal Cross? Well, I want you to imagine the 360-degree wheel of a horoscope. That basically is the journey that the sun passes through each year. And the reason that we have 365 days and the wheel is 360 degrees is because in actual fact the sun moves just slightly slower than 1 degree a day. Now, in Western tropical astrology, it is predicated on the seasons. The first season we have, because it is a Mediterranean construct, is the spring. And that starts with the vernal equinox and the return of the sun to the sign of Aries. Then we have the summer solstice. The sun makes its way into the sign of Cancer, and that brings in the next 13-week quarter or quadrant. Then we have the autumnal equinox. The sun moves into Libra, and that ushers in a 13-week period, which is very much about how we interact, but also set our boundaries and can compete. And then finally we have the winter solstice, and that sees the sun move into the sign of Capricorn, which is its point of culmination. This is where we're thinking about our connection to the wider world, and that's very much to do with jobs, status, authority, traditionality. So it's really the end point of the journey. So the 13 weeks from the winter solstice through to the spring equinox is the last of the quarters. So I want you to imagine within that 360-degree wheel a point that's 90 degrees apart. In astrology, 90 degrees is a square. So the first point on this event is the position of the North Node. This is not a planet, it's an intersection point between the Sun and the Moon. And critically, it's moved into the sign of Aries on the 17th of July, and it's going to be there for the next year and a half. And why it's critical is because Aries is the first zodiac sign, so it's the start of our journey. And zodiac means the procession of the zodiac, the procession of the animals. But because the North Node, along with the South Node, because they're on an axis, are always reversing backwards, for the next year and a half, the nodal axis will be in Aries and Libra through to the end of January 2025. And that is going to be the start point of a completely new epoch. Because Aries is about encountering things, it's about freshness, excitement. So the fact that it's just reversed into Aries doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get all the benefits. We have to learn the lessons. I'll give you an example. So over the last year and a half, the North Node has been in the sign of Taurus, and the South Node in the sign of Scorpio. Taurus energy is very much about our self-worth, our values, but also it's to do with resources because of the Earth, the resources of the Earth. The North Node is the outcome of our activities in the 8th house of Scorpio. So in other words, what we reap is what we sow. So over the last couple of years, as the North Node has interacted with Uranus and a couple of eclipses, and critically also Saturn, we have seen a massive reset, and that has seen the cost of living go up. It's pushing us to be much more conscious of how we use energy, how we use water, even the amount of clothes we buy. We're all being made much more conscious about consumption. So the spiritual lesson of the nodal axis going through Scorpio and Taurus was actually breaking us away from rampant consumption. It's not to say no consumption is a good thing. It's nice to enjoy good food, have nice clothes and so forth, but it's having a much greater respect of not just consuming these things without too much of a second thought. So the North Node moving into the sign of Aries is, if you like, an opportunity to recreate the importance of us as individuals, to find out our identity, because that's very much about the first house, and it's very much about our bodies, and it's very much about how we're perceived by others. So by the time we get to the end of January 2025, that is going to be the year which is truly exciting, because Pluto will be full-time in Aquarius. We're going to see Saturn move into the sign of Aries. We're going to see Neptune move into the sign of Aries. And we're going to see Uranus move into the sign of Gemini. So year 2025 will be the big reset. So where we are in this process with this grand cardinal cross, we're at the outset of the next set of lessons that we need to learn. So on the screen now, I'm showing the Zodiac Wheel based on a solar perspective. So the vernal point at 0 degrees in Aries creates the first house. And there you can see the North Node parked up at 29 degrees and 11 minutes. But if we count along 90 degrees, you can see the Sun in the 4th house in this chart is at 29 degrees and 7 minutes. So if you really are into astrology, you'll know that that 4 minutes between them means this is not an absolutely exact event. Now later on the 22nd of July, what happens is the North Node inverses a bit more and does come into a square with the Sun, but the Sun's no longer in an exact opposition with Pluto. So we can take 2 points of the day, as I have at 3:52 a.m. based on Greenwich and Universal Central Time, or we can look at it later in the day at 12:45, and that's when the nodes will be square the Sun but not Pluto. So it's an approximation on these two events that happen on this day, but within 4 minutes is incredibly close. So let's just think about it. The North Node's pushing us over the next year and a half because it's reversing backwards to 0 degrees Aries in its relationship, its tense relationship with the Sun, to balance our individuality with our need for security, safety, somewhere to live that's affordable, is warm, is cozy, where we can nurture our relationships with one another, but also our inner relationship with ourselves, emotion, which is what Cancer's about. But then you can see the South Node, which is where we're coming from, is at 29:11 in the 7th house of Libra, so the next cardinal quadrant, and that's asking us to be conscious of who we've been interacting with, how people perceive us, and that can, in traditional astrology, be known as open enemies. So that may be the people we have to work with, we're not particularly keen upon, but we have to rub along. It could be neighbours that, we might say hi in the mornings, but we're not necessarily the best of friends. The 7th house can also be where we compete, set our boundaries, but critically it's where we interact and relate. And one of the things that I feel that this next 18 months is going to push us all is to become much more aware of the impact that social media has on all of us. Many of us use it and we may get something from it, but it can have downsides. So the South Node is perhaps where we've given away our power in relationships and lost our sense of identity a little bit by being too much of a people pleaser, whereas Aries is asking us to find that tipping point in the middle where we feel more balance between being in touch with how we feel about our connections to others, but more in touch and owning the agency of ourselves, to use a modern term. But if we go 90 degrees on to the position of Pluto, which of course is very much to do with transformations, can be to do with secrets, And the sign of Capricorn can be to do with big business, and of course Pluto can be about power, and that's in retrograde, and you can see that is exactly opposite the Sun. So when people have the Sun opposite Pluto in their natal charts, they can be very belligerent. They can be people that see or act out power scenarios in their life. So for example, if you try to negotiate with someone with Pluto opposite the Sun, they may find it difficult to hear your viewpoint or feel it's almost an assault on their identity. And equally, they can be very trenchant in their opinions. It's their way or no way. So Pluto obviously can have a very powerful impact on the nodal axis. And just so you know, it is going to be T-squaring them right through to the end of August. Why will it come to an end when essentially the nodes are always rewinding and Pluto's in retrograde? Well, it's because the nodes are going to go a little bit quicker. Their feet are going a little bit quicker than slow old Pluto. So by the end of August, they're inverting inside of that T-square. So truly, I feel over the next year and a half, because of when this event occurs, we've also got Mars and Saturn in an exact opposition. You can see Mars there in the sign of Virgo, which is quite sharp to the point, quite punctilious. It can be a bit more self-sacrificing in terms of the ego, but it's in opposition to Saturn. So for me, this is very much about trying to get a balance between our physical and material situation and being much more open to the psychological sphere and being much less haunted by the whole concept of mental health. So particularly in the Western world, we see death, we see depression, we see anxiety as really scary and not very pleasant things, but probably most of us will experience some anxiety and depression in our lives, and all of us are going to experience death. Because those two are in such an abrasive opposition, that energy is going to echo out over the next year and a half, because it is the event chart of when this event occurs. It is going to be that influential. There are some nice things going on. Neptune's forging a beautiful link to the Sun and also to Pluto. That sort of gentrifies things a little bit. But we do have a square between Uranus and Mercury. Mercury in the sign of Leo has to have its opinion. It's quite proud and quite intense and a bit fixed sign. And of course Uranus is in its full in Taurus, fixed. So if we have fixed ideas about our need to spend money and enjoy ourselves, because the midpoint, Mercury and Venus are all in Leo, which is very much about embracing that spirit of sociability, but also enjoying the consuming side of the situation. So we are going to have quite a lot of tension over the next year and a half. I feel that's an absolute fact, and this chart shows exactly why. So a grand cardinal cross, we have cardinal signs are about action, they're about leadership, they're a lot about taking control to a degree, and each of these 4 points are competing with one another in order to get the upper hand. The Sun in an opposition, the nodal axis in an opposition, but then they're all 90 degrees apart, agitating. So any action that we take has an immediate ramification. I have a fixed grand cross in my natal chart, so that means it's all in fixed signs, and Neptune threaded through all of it. So that's a very positive influence to have in terms of being very sensitive and tuned into what's going on, but quite a challenging influence in my own natal chart. So these grand crosses are not to be taken lightly. So I hope that's given you a little bit of a flavour of what we can expect. But essentially, the Sun's asking us to be mindful of protectiveness, but we are seeing a lot of power plays in terms of people putting up the cost of rentals in order to gain more revenue. We are seeing the property market in terms of purchases very overcooked. We're seeing interest rates up, which makes it a tension in terms of the traditional position of Pluto, which is about, most people gain some security from ownership, or at least having a long-term assured lease. Say if it's housing association property, that's much more secure than being in a private rental. So we're seeing some dark stuff, Pluto, around the housing sector, and we're all trying to make sense of this. The node, the North Node moving into Aries, finding out who we are, this new financial reality that we've learned from the last year and a half of the node going through Taurus, the North Node. But we've also got some other stuff going on there that, we could find ourselves a bit stroppy. We don't want to limit our situations, the Leo energy, but Uranus is saying, look, this is not going to dissipate, this reset around resources. It's not going to dissipate truly until year 2025, where we will get a new reality coming in. And then the clash between Mars and Saturn means that at times we could feel quite exhausted by all of this, to be honest. Now, it's important, of course, to look at the more positive aspects of the situation, pardon the pun, aspects, the more positive influences, I should say. So if we can integrate and be more accepting that we are a holistic being in terms of our need for a little bit of luxury, a little bit of lush, a little bit of security, we can find ourselves as individuals but relate well to others, and we can do it in a way that's good for our physical and also mental health. We are surfing this event, and we can get to the end of the next year and a half period and be in a better place than we are now as a collective. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure being with you. Good luck and goodbye.